I didn't realize I was sabotaging myself until I saw this pattern. And chances are you're caught in it too. It's invisible while it's happening, disguised as small choices. But over time, it's the reason you feel stuck. Most people never notice the pattern, and because they don't, they spend years fighting themselves instead of building their future. But once you see it, once you finally recognize it, everything changes. So let's begin with how this pattern first shows up in your life. The invisible pattern at first, you don't see it. That's the trap. Self-sabotage doesn't show up waving red flags. It slips in quietly, hidden inside the ordinary moments of your day. You wake up and tell yourself you'll get to that important task later. You put off that call, you scroll for just a minute that somehow turns into an hour. And in the moment, none of it feels like sabotage. It feels normal. It feels harmless. But here's the truth you don't want to face. It's never harmless. Every delay, every excuse, every time you trade what matters for what feels easy, that's the pattern working on you. And the scariest part, you don't even realize it's happening until you've already lost months, maybe even years. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself, "It'll start tomorrow. It'll try again next week. I just need more time, more energy, more motivation." Those words sound innocent, but they're poison. They're the language of sabotage, and you've been repeating them to yourself on autopilot. This is why you stay stuck. Not because you're lazy, not because you're broken, but because you've been trapped in a pattern that feeds on your blind spots. You've been sabotaging yourself, not in dramatic explosions, but in quiet little choices that nobody else notices. And here's the painful part. The longer you don't see it, the stronger it grows. One skipped action becomes two, two become a habit, and before you realize it, you've built a life full of detours instead of the one you were meant to live. That's why the pattern is so dangerous. You think you're fine, you think you're making progress, but beneath the surface, you're quietly cutting your own legs out from under you. And once that truth sinks in, you can't ignore it anymore. But if the pattern is so invisible, why do you keep repeating it? Why you repeat the cycle? You repeat the cycle because your own mind is working against you. It's not that you don't want progress, you do. Deep down you crave it. But your brain is designed for survival, not success. It will always pull you back towards safety, even when safety is the very thing keeping you stuck. That's why you find yourself hesitating when opportunity knocks. That's why you stall on the one action you know could move your life forward. It isn't because you're weak. It's because your brain is wired to avoid risk. It whispers excuses that sound logical. You're not ready yet. You need more information. Wait until things calm down. And every time you listen, the sabotage tightens its grip. The cycle repeats because comfort feels safer than growth. And in that moment, you convince yourself you're making the right decision. You tell yourself you'll do it tomorrow. You convince yourself that delaying isn't the same as destroying. But the truth is, every delay, every hesitation is another round of the same cycle. This is why you look back at weeks, months, even years of your life and wonder why nothing has changed. It's not that you never tried, you did. But every time you were about to break through, the pattern pulled you back. The cycle started over again, and you didn't even realize you were repeating it. And here is the most painful part. You think you're making rational choices, but in reality, you're protecting your fears. You're not avoiding the work. You're avoiding the risk of failing, the risk of being judged, the risk of stepping outside the safe little bubble you've built around yourself. That's why the sabotage feels so invisible, because it disguises itself as self-preservation. But here's the irony. By trying to protect yourself, you're actually destroying yourself. You're keeping yourself small. You're repeating the cycle because fear has more control over your decisions than your future does. And until you see that, the pattern will keep running your life. And that fear, it doesn't always look like fear. The disguise of fear, fear doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always show up as panic in your chest or shaking in your hands. Most of the time, it's far more subtle. It wears disguises so clever you don't even recognize it for what it is. Sometimes fear looks like procrastination. You delay the work not because you don't care, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you actually finish it. What if it isn't good enough? What if people judge you? What if you succeed and can't handle what comes next? Instead of facing those questions, you push things off. That's not laziness, that's fear in disguise. Other times, fear looks like perfectionism. You tell yourself, you just need to fix one more thing, polish one more detail, make it flawless before you release it. But the truth is, perfect is just a shield you hide behind. It keeps you from being exposed. It keeps you from having to face the possibility of falling short. And sometimes, fear looks like endless preparation. You convince yourself you need more research, more studying, more time before you can begin. It feels responsible, it feels smart, but really, it's fear again, fear tricking you into believing you're not ready, when the truth is, you'll never feel ready. This is how fear manipulates you. It doesn't scream, don't move forward. Instead, it whispers, wait just a little longer. Do one more thing first. Make it safer. And you listen because it sounds reasonable. But underneath that voice is the same pattern of sabotage, stealing your progress while convincing you that you're protecting yourself. And here's the cruel twist. Fear, in its disguises, can make you feel productive. You feel busy when you're fixing small details. You feel smart when you're doing more research. You feel responsible when you're waiting for the right time. But deep down, you know nothing important has changed. You haven't moved an inch closer to what matters. This is why the sabotage is so dangerous, because it doesn't always feel like sabotage. It feels like progress. And that's exactly how it keeps you trapped. But once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. Once you realize fear has been wearing masks, you start to recognize its patterns everywhere. And that's when the sabotage becomes even trickier, because now it doesn't just steal your time. It convinces you that you're moving forward when you're actually standing still. The illusion of progress. One of the most dangerous traps in self-sabotage is the illusion of progress. You feel like you're moving forward, but in reality, you're running in circles. You're busy, yes. You're active, yes. But none of it is moving you closer to the life you actually want. Think about how often you've spent hours answering messages, clearing your inbox, scrolling through information, checking off small tasks. At the end of the day, you're exhausted, but when you look back, nothing important has changed. That's the illusion. You confuse activity with achievement, and this is where the pattern becomes even more powerful, because the illusion of progress feels good. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, a temporary rush of relief, a false sense of momentum. But deep down, you know you're avoiding the real work, the scary work, the meaningful work. And the longer you live inside this illusion, the more you reinforce the sabotage. The danger is simple. The illusion convinces you that you're safe. It whispers, you are doing enough, you are staying productive, you're not falling behind. But the truth is, the world doesn't reward busyness. It rewards results. And every day you spend trapped in the illusion is another day you've stolen from your own future. That's why you can wake up one morning, look at your life, and wonder why you're still in the same place despite all your effort. It isn't because you weren't working. It's because you were sabotaging yourself by investing energy into things that never moved the needle. You weren't idle. You were just climbing the wrong ladder, faster and faster, without realizing it was leaning against the wrong wall. And this is the cruelest form of self-sabotage, because at least with procrastination, you know you are stalling. At least with excuses, you can feel the avoidance. But with false progress, you trick yourself into believing you're on track. You smile at the small wins while silently losing the war. Once you see it, though, you can't ignore it. You realize that progress isn't about how much you do, it's about whether what you are doing actually matters. So the real question becomes, what keeps pulling you back into this illusion? What triggers make you reach for sabotage again and again? The triggers of self-sabotage. Every pattern has a trigger. And once you know it sets it off, you finally have the power to interrupt it. Self-sabotage is no different. It doesn't appear out of nowhere. Something always sparks it. For some, the trigger is stress. You feel overwhelmed, and instead of facing the thing that matters most, you escape into what feels easier: a distraction, a delay, a task that doesn't really count. For others, the trigger is doubt. You second-guess yourself. And the moment you do, sabotage slips in, convincing you to play small instead of stepping forward. Comparison can trigger it too. You see someone ahead of you, doing better, moving faster, and suddenly you tell yourself, why bother? They'll never catch up. That one thought is enough to paralyze you. And then there's uncertainty, not knowing the outcome, not having every detail figured out. Uncertainty makes you hesitate, and hesitation is the perfect breeding ground for sabotage. The truth is, your sabotage is predictable. It has a pattern, and it usually starts the moment you feel fear, stress, doubt, or uncertainty. That's when you reach for comfort. That's when you delay the real work. That's when you make the choice that feels safe in the short term, but destroys you in the long term. And here's the hard part to admit. The trigger isn't always external. Sometimes it's your own thoughts. The story you tell yourself, the identity you cling to, the old beliefs you never questioned. You tell yourself you're not disciplined enough, not smart enough, not ready yet, and sabotage is right there to nod along, to push you back into the same loop again. But once you see the triggers, something changes. You stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what sets this off in me? That question gives you clarity, and clarity is the first step to freedom, because once you know the triggers, you can start building a new pattern, one that's stronger than the sabotage you've been living in. The counter pattern: you can't just destroy a pattern by willpower alone. If you try to simply stop sabotaging, the old loop will win. Why? Because habits don't vanish, they get replaced. To break sabotage, you need a counter pattern, something stronger, something deliberate. This counter pattern doesn't start with massive change. It begins with small keystone actions, the kind of choices that ripple out into everything else. It might be as simple as finally sitting down for an uninterrupted hour, or deciding that today you face the one thing you've been avoiding. The size of the action doesn't matter. What matters is that it breaks the rhythm of sabotage. Here's the tension: sabotage thrives on hesitation. Every time you pause, every time you delay, the pattern strengthens. But when you act, even with a small step, you cut off its oxygen. You flip the script. Instead of waiting for motivation, you create it. Instead of letting fear whisper its excuses, you answer with movement. This is where the counter pattern gains power. At first, it feels fragile. You'll be tempted to slip back into old habits. But with repetition, the new pattern gets stronger. And soon, it begins to replace the sabotage entirely. You start making choices that align with your future, not your fear. And the payoff? You realize you don't need to fight sabotage forever. You just need to starve it long enough for the counter pattern to take root. Once it does, you are no longer reacting to fear, you are building from strength. And that's when something powerful begins to happen. One small action turns into two. Two turns into five. Before you realize it, you've built momentum, and momentum is the antidote to sabotage. Momentum, your escape route. Momentum changes everything. It's the force that takes you from struggling to start to becoming unstoppable. And here's the truth: sabotage can survive hesitation, but it cannot survive momentum. Once you build it, the pattern begins to lose its grip on you. Think about the last time you actually stuck with something for more than a few days. At first, it felt hard. You had to push yourself, fight your own resistance, argue with the voice in your head that told you to quit. But once you got moving, something shifted. The effort didn't feel as heavy. The actions didn't feel as impossible. That's momentum. Here's the tension: momentum is fragile. One distraction, one bad day, one small slip, and the old sabotage pattern will try to drag you right back. And if you let it, the cycle starts all over again. That's why most people never escape. They spark momentum, but they don't protect it. They let sabotage creep back in and undo everything they've built. But when you do protect momentum, the payoff is extraordinary. You stop seeing yourself as someone who keeps failing and start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. You begin to trust yourself again. And that shift in identity is everything, because once you see yourself differently, your choices begin to match. Momentum is your escape route. It's proof to your brain that progress is safe. It retrains your mind to crave growth instead of avoiding it. And the longer you hold on to, the harder it becomes for sabotage to pull you back. But here's the danger: momentum might be your escape, but it's also the most fragile part of the journey, which means the next step is critical: learning how to protect what you've built before sabotage finds a way back in. Protecting your momentum. Momentum is powerful, but it's also fragile. The truth is, it doesn't take much to lose it. One slip, one distraction, one moment of doubt, and the old sabotage pattern is right there waiting to drag you back. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself starting over again and again, wondering why you can't seem to hold on. This is where most people fail. They mistake momentum for permanence. They think a few good days, a few wins mean they're safe. But sabotage doesn't disappear just because you've made progress. It waits. It looks for cracks in your focus. And the moment you stop protecting your progress, the pattern slips back in. You've felt this before. You start strong. You build rhythm, and then something small interrupts it. Maybe you check your phone before you begin. Maybe you skip one day and promise yourself you'll catch up tomorrow. Maybe someone else's demands pull you off track. And just like that, the energy fades. What felt unstoppable suddenly feels like it never happened. Here's the tension: you don't just need momentum. You need boundaries that guard it. If you don't draw the line, the world will cross it for you. Sabotage thrives on those small leaks, those moments when you let your focus get stolen. The payoff comes when you learn to protect your progress like it's sacred. That means setting non-negotiables. That means refusing to check the noise before you've handled what matters. That means treating your momentum like a Fire one careless move and it can burn out, but if you tend to it daily, it grows into something unstoppable. And when you protect it long enough, something incredible happens. The little wins start stacking. Small progress compounds into massive change. And that's when you see the full truth. Sabotage doesn't just steal your time, it compounds downward, but so does growth. And once you choose which one you'll let compound, your entire future shifts. Compounding growth versus compounding sabotage, every choice you make compounds. That's the secret most people never see, the little. Decisions you dismiss as unimportant, they don't disappear. They stack, they build, and over time they shape the life you end up living. Think about it like a bank account. Every action you take is a deposit. Skip the thing you know you should do, that's a deposit. Show up and face the uncomfortable task, that's a deposit too. The only difference is which account you're feeding. And eventually those deposits grow into something far bigger than the individual choices that created them. Here is the painful truth. Sabotage compounds just as powerfully as success. Every time you delay, every time you avoid, every time you choose comfort over progress, you're making a deposit into the wrong account. One day of hesitation doesn't ruin you. A single excuse doesn't collapse your future. But 10 years of it, that will. That's how people wake up decades later, staring at a life that doesn't look anything like the one they dreamed of, wondering how it all slipped away. And this is what makes the sabotage pattern so dangerous. You don't feel the damage right away. You don't feel it when you hit snooze on the alarm, or when you skip one workout, or when you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. Those moments feel harmless, they feel forgettable. But the pattern is patient. It knows that each of those choices is a seed. And if you plant the wrong seed every day, eventually you're going to reap the wrong harvest. Skipping one workout doesn't make you unhealthy. Ignoring one opportunity doesn't collapse your future. Putting off one conversation doesn't destroy a relationship. But small choices don't stay small. They stack quietly, invisibly, until one day you look back and realize you've built a mountain out of avoidance. A mountain so heavy it keeps you stuck in place, no matter how badly you want to climb out. But here's the good news, and this is where the shift begins. The same principle works in your favor. Growth compounds too. One small action today doesn't look like much. Reading one page, making one call, taking one step toward the thing you've been avoiding, it feels tiny, almost meaningless. You may even tell yourself it won't make a difference. But stack those tiny actions every day, and soon they create momentum. That momentum grows into progress, and that progress compounds into transformation. Think of the person who spends 10 minutes a day writing. At first it looks laughable. What difference could 10 minutes make? But give it a year and they have a book. Think of the person who saves just a few dollars a day. At first it looks like nothing. But give it a decade and they've built wealth. Small things repeated don't stay small, they become your life. This is where the real shift happens. Once you flip the pattern, you stop being the person who sabotages and start being the person who compounds. And over time, that identity becomes stronger than the sabotage ever was. Because the more evidence you collect, the more days you stack where you followed through instead of falling back, the harder it becomes to see yourself as the person who quits. You start to see yourself as someone who builds, someone who follows through, someone who creates momentum instead of destroying it. That's when you stop living on autopilot and start engineering your future, not with one massive leap, but with 1,000 small steps that all move in the same direction. That's when you finally realize your life isn't built in single dramatic moments. It's built in the quiet, daily decisions you make when no one is watching. The only question left is this: which pattern are you going to let compound in your life? Because whether you admit it or not, you're already compounding something. You're either compounding sabotage or you're compounding growth. And the future you're heading toward will be determined entirely by which one you choose to feed today. And when that realization hits you, when it finally lands deep inside you, something else comes into focus, the breakthrough. The breakthrough, looking back, you realize something that almost knocks the air out of you. It was never bad luck. It was never that you weren't smart enough, disciplined enough, or worthy enough. The truth was always simpler, but harder to face. You weren't being held back by the world. You weren't being crushed by circumstances. You were sabotaging yourself. And the worst part? You didn't even know it. That's why the same problems kept circling back into your life. You worked harder, you tried longer, you pushed yourself to exhaustion, and yet nothing really changed. You'd take 2 steps forward and then slide back 3. You thought life was unfair. You thought maybe you just weren't cut out for more. But the reality was different. You weren't cursed. You weren't broken. You were trapped in a pattern you couldn't see. And that pattern was running your life like a script you didn't even know you'd memorized. It explains why every time you felt a breakthrough was near, you sabotaged it. That big idea you never acted on, that opportunity you let slip by, that habit you started with fire only to abandon. After a few weeks, you didn't fail because you were weak. You failed because sabotage has a voice, and you didn't recognize it was speaking through you. Here's the tension. The pattern doesn't just vanish when you notice it. Just because you've seen it doesn't mean it stops trying. It will still whisper to you. It will still show up dressed as logic, dressed as comfort, dressed as reason. It will still disguise itself as just taking a break or waiting for the right time. It will offer you safety, safety from risk, from embarrassment, from discomfort. And if you're not careful, you'll still listen, because that voice is familiar. That voice feels like home. But here's the shift. Now you hold the advantage. Now, when the pattern tries to tighten its grip, you see it for what it is. You catch yourself in the moment. You notice when the excuse shows up. You notice when you start leaning toward comfort. And in that moment of awareness, you finally get to choose differently. And every time you choose differently, you carve a new path. You write a new pattern. One that doesn't shrink you. One that doesn't betray your future. One that finally aligns with the person you know deep down you were meant to become. This is the breakthrough. You're not fighting shadows anymore. You're not stumbling through life blind, wondering why progress slips away just when you feel closest to it. You've seen the sabotage clearly now, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. That's power, that's control, and when that realization fully sinks in, the payoff is almost overwhelming. You finally understand that your life wasn't limited by chance, by talent, or by what you lacked. It was limited by the patterns you didn't recognize. You've spent years blaming circumstances, blaming timing, blaming yourself, when all along it was this invisible loop running quietly in the background. But now it's exposed. And with every choice you make, you weaken it. With every action you take, you starve it. And with every moment you refuse to bow to it, you take back a piece of your life that it once controlled. So here's what this means for you. You were never powerless. You were never broken. You were never destined to fail. You were simply sabotaging yourself in ways you couldn't see. But now you can. And that single shift, that single moment of awareness is enough to rewrite everything that comes after this. Because once you see the pattern, you no longer live as its prisoner. You become its master. And from that moment forward, your future belongs to you again.